You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, yep, it's me again, Steve Adams or Mighty Blue, and you are listening to Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. And that tagline, the ultimate midlife crisis, that was something I kind of absently put up when I was setting the podcast up back in 2016. Of course, I was referring to my own midlife crisis. Well, actually it was about my fifth, but you know what I mean. Today's guest, Michael Sisemore, or Si, is somebody who articulates those life changes that take place on a thru hike about as well as I've ever heard them articulated. And it wasn't a midlife crisis for him, he was a younger guy. Mike did the Appalachian Trail back in the very last year of the last century, yet many of the ramifications of that hike are only hitting home now. We spoke a few weeks ago, and I think you're going to enjoy hearing what Mike, or Si, has to say. He'll be on in a moment. Now, I normally wait until just before I speak with Katie to do my thank yous to our wonderful donors. Yet this past week has been quite the revelation for me. If you recall, I was talking about giving value for value. That so many of you have stepped up with generous donations to help support the shows that we do here on the Hiking Radio Network. We got recurring and some new monthly donations from Michelle Brown, Hugh Ickrath, Melanie Swisher, Anne Hinton and Dobson, and somebody who'd prefer to remain anonymous. Of course I'm going to honour that request, but you know who you are, buddy, and I thank each of you gratefully. Also, we had donations from Jens Libheider, Jennifer Clement, William Matthews, David Collins, Walter Wolantarski and Deb Taylor. Deb also gave me a good referral for a future guest, so thanks to all of you once more. If you would like to help out with this idea of value for value, go to any of the Hiking Radio Network pages and click on the donate button. Thanks so much. Moving on with the show, after Si, we're going to catch up with Katie once more. Do you know, I thought over the weeks that perhaps Katie was going to call me one day and say, Steve, I'm afraid I'm done. You know, a recurrence of a knee or something else. But each week she bounces back and her spirit shines through. This week she's going to be telling us all about doing an 18-mile day. Go Katie, and we'll hear more from her after Si. So let's hear now from Michael Sisemore, or as he's definitely going to prefer you to refer to him, Si. I should warn you that we had a few microphone issues in the beginning, but it shouldn't ruin your enjoyment of what he has to tell us. Here he is. So we've got an interesting guest today, somebody who hiked the AT in the last century. This is Michael Sisemore, or Si. Hey Michael, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on your show.
Well, I'm pleased to have you here. And you wrote to me some time ago, telling me about a book that you've written. And don't worry, we're going to get to that. But you and I have had correspondence and have spoken recently. So I'd like to cover a number of things that came up in our discussions. And you were 33 years old when you hit the trail in 1999. And as I've remarked on this show several times, that seems to be a very unusual age to put your life on hold. What were the circumstances that led you onto the trail at that age?
There were a lot of circumstances. You know, you hear about the proverbial midlife crisis. I think I was
early.
I think I was a little bit early to the game there. I had more of a life crisis. An identity crisis, a purpose crisis, and I had been in a very unpleasant relationship, and I had recently gotten divorced, and somehow during the latter year of my marriage, this idea of hiking the AT just kind of happened. And I got divorced, and a few weeks later, I was hiking the Appalachian Trail, and I was literally looking for a reason to exist. You know, why am I here? Because up to that point, I had been stuck in the hamster wheel of life. You know, you work, you pay bills, you go back to work so that you can pay your bills. And I had no sense of value or happiness and joy. My whole life was built around working as much as I possibly could to pay for all of the junk that I had in my life. And I just walked away from everything.
Isn't that amazing? In fact, and what were you doing pre-hike then? What was your job?
I was in commercial construction in Atlanta, which is a stressful city to work in because of the traffic and the pace of life. And it paid really well, and I really enjoyed what I did, but it didn't fulfill me, and it didn't really give me a sense of purpose. It was just a means to an end. And, working 6 days a week, often, 70 hours a week, it didn't leave a lot of time for anything else.
You say it's stressful working in construction in Atlanta. You're a school teacher now. I think that's been stressful as well.
A different kind of stress. Being a teacher is the hardest job I've ever had, but I love it. I really enjoy it. Working with the kids is the easy part.
I'm sure it's very rewarding. Now, I'm going to talk. Actually, we're going to talk fairly briefly because normally we talk about the hike, but there are things that happen in your life that I like to talk about actually outside the hike as well, which I found quite interesting. So let's talk about the hike. Sure. Did you go alone?
I did. I did a solo hike. I didn't have a partner, but as you know, and I think everybody else that's been on the Appalachian Trail, it's actually quite difficult to find solitude and actually be alone on the trail. But yeah, I did a solo hike.
All right. So, and was that because no one else would go with you, or was that because that was something you chose to because you felt you wanted that solitude?
A little of both, but mostly the latter. I chose to really walk away from everything that I had been before. I left behind my home, career, friends, family. I left everything behind me, and my intention was to find a future somewhere out there, and I didn't want anything tying me down to all of that I had left. And if I had brought someone with me, that would have been, an excuse to possibly quit or to deviate from my goal or to have something that tied me back home. So I literally walked away from it.
So you were taking you felt at the time that this was a positive step you were taking. And trust me, Michael, I will cut this out if you don't want me to ask it.
Sure.
Were you at all suicidal at that stage, or do you think you were looking for something different, but was suicide an option at the time?
I've thought about that a lot, especially since I've been working with kids for so long.
Right.
I don't think I was. I think I was just so completely and profoundly lost that I didn't know what to do. And I just threw chance to the wind, and going on a solo hike and leaving everything behind was completely out of character. Everything that I had done in my life to that point was meticulously planned out and structured. And, it was a complete contradiction to my parents' upbringing because, one, you don't quit your job. You don't get divorced. You aren't irresponsible. And I did all of that.
Yeah.
And it was, I think, heartbreaking to my parents that I did do all of that, but I knew that I had to figure it out. And
was that going against your nature at the time? Had you been a conformist all your life, or was it something that really was you felt the need to do the AT? I mean, for what reason, and why the AT?
It was, that's an interesting question. I grew up in the South. When I was a little boy, my brother, who was much older than I, had mentioned the Appalachian Trail. And he showed me a National Geographic magazine. And I think that was my first encounter with the greater world, other possibilities. And that kind of came back to me much later in life. And another facet that sort of helped that seed grow into something bigger is when I was in the Army, I was stationed in North Georgia, in Dahlonega, Georgia, at a ranger camp. I was in the...
you were one of those ones that come down into is it Hawk Mountain Shelter or Gooch, one of the shelters, and frighten the crap out of hikers.
That was me. And I got stationed there to work with Ranger School. I had spent my first 2 years in the Army in the 3rd Ranger Battalion of Fort Benning, and I transferred to the Ranger School. So we were always on the Appalachian Trail, doing different things. And that familiarity with it, I think, took some of the mystery of the trail away. But I was hiking the approach trail from Amicalola Falls to Springer Mountain, I had hiked it dozens of times just casually, and it was literally my backyard because where I lived in Dahlonega and then later in Gainesville, Georgia and Dawsonville, Georgia, it was a 25 or 30-minute drive to the trailhead. So it was familiar to me. And it was the only really long distance trail that I knew about. I was completely naive. I was not an educated hiker when I started. I literally just filled a backpack with stuff and left. And I said, I'll figure it out as I go.
As some people do. So you knew where you were. So you knew what the trail was like and that. But you didn't know whether you're going to like it or not, did you really? So when did you start feeling comfortable on the trail? When did you think this was working for you? Was it the whole journey, or after the journey you thought about that, or did you find you were getting into your stride and say by North Carolina you were feeling much better?
By the time I got to trail days, I felt like I was in that hiking groove. My body was good. My strength was good. I felt comfortable. I had an excellent pace. I had lost a lot of weight. The first day on the trail, I felt very ambitious. And the second day on the trail, I thought to myself, this is really going to be hard because I was carrying way too much weight and I could only do 8 miles the first day. And then, the second day and the third day, get to Blood Mountain. By the time I got to the Wassee Center, I was like, I've got to make some changes or this is going to be far harder than I thought. And I dumped a lot of weight. And then probably by the 5th or 6th day, I was feeling that it was more of an adventure than a grueling trek through the woods. And
wow.
It got easier and easier and easier. But I was still early on, I was walking away from everything. And, every step in front of me was something new. And I didn't know what, the next day was going to bring.
Yeah, I can see that. And funny enough, when I was thinking about these questions, I had that image in my mind that you were walking away from something. Mm-hmm. And was Katahdin always the goal? Was it important for you to get to Katahdin to get to that goal?
Katahdin was my only concrete goal. When I signed the journal at Springer Mountain, I wrote an entire page, which was more than I had written in a very, very long time. And I signed off on it. I have envisioned myself standing on top of Mount Katahdin. Wow. The hike is complete. I just need to walk it. I've talked the talk. Now I will walk the walk. So I was 100%.
That's setting yourself up. That's setting yourself up, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like during preseason, you say we're going to win the Super Bowl. Yeah.
So you had the target for Katahdin. I'm going to actually ask you about your Katahdin day in a minute. How many people were through hiking that year? Do you know? Do you remember the sort of numbers?
I want to say about 3,000 people started.
Oh, really? Wow.
And about 350 finished, or at least registered a complete hike, I think. It was a very busy year because it was the last year of the millennium, and a lot of people wanted to get their hike in 1999 and then again in 2000. And also, Earl Schaefer had done his 50th anniversary hike the year before, so that drew a lot of attention to the AT.
And also the Bill Bryson book had come out by then.
Oh, absolutely. That had inspired a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm sure. So did you said you're difficult to have solitude. Nowadays they call it a tramily, and I'm not sure when that name started, a trail family. Mm-hmm. Did you have that, or were there times when you were hiking for 400 or 500 miles with some people?
I acquired a tramily through the hike. There were probably a dozen of us.
Right, nice.
Hiked pretty closely for the second 2/3 of the trail. Everybody has a different pace. So you may be with 4 or 5 people for a couple of days and then you hike ahead, or people catch up to you. But I got to know...
I never did the hiking ahead bit. My pace was never that fast.
My trail name evolved into Superfly Side because I did hike pretty quick. But I took 30 0 days throughout the entire hike and still finished in 5.5 months.
Wow.
But I'm still in pretty regular contact with a lot of people that I hiked with 22 years ago.
Because they're the only, they're the only other people who understand it, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. you know it as well as I do. Anybody
It
that's been
makes
on
a
a long
difference.
trail. Yeah, you could talk about the trail experience, and people that don't hike just they can never actually fully comprehend the
Yeah.
experience.
And you said earlier that you thought that it was difficult. You know, when I asked you about going alone, you said it was kind of difficult to get solitude. But there are times you can have solitude out on the trail. And did you find that you were able to work out the various issues, or were you always, you know, because for me, I was working out things and apologising for crap I'd done in the past. So were there times that you were thinking what you were going to do in the future, and did you work those things out while you were moving forward towards Katahdin?
I didn't really think about my future too much as I was hiking. When I started hiking, I had several commitments that I made to myself. One, I was going to be more gregarious and outgoing because I was quite shy, actually, before my hike. I didn't go out of my way to socialize with people that I didn't know. I was pretty reserved, and I didn't want to be that on the trail. I wanted to kind of push my comfort zone as much as I could. So I was really trying to be in the moment as much as possible. The term they use now is being present. I didn't know what that was back then, but
Yes.
I was trying to be as present as I possibly could, and also trying to figure out myself, why did things not work out for me, with my relationship and lots of other things. So when you're in the woods hiking for, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, you have a lot of time to think. And as you get more and more into it and get more separated from that old world, your brain does some pretty bizarre things. It dredges up memories that are decades old sometimes that you had long forgotten, and conversations would pop into my head that I had had, and this awareness of how I interact with people that wasn't necessarily positive, and coming to grips with my role in my relationship's failure was very eye-opening and humbling as well. And I don't think that would have happened had I stayed there. I needed that separation to grow emotionally.
So it sounds like in many ways you were actually trying to reinvent yourself. That's an interesting thing. You said you weren't very gregarious, but you can't become gregarious, can you? Do you think, or does being gregarious come from confidence, and the trail and your ability to do the trail? Did that give you that confidence?
I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but I think in my case that confidence was a serious factor. As I interacted with people that I had never seen before, and lots of different types of people, I got more and more confidence in my own sense of who I was, and that people on the trail accept you for who you are, no matter what you are.
Isn't that a shocker? Isn't that a shocker, eh?
Yeah, so many campfires, we're sitting in a circle with a dozen people from a dozen completely different backgrounds and demographic categories, and nobody cares. Everybody's just a hiker. And as I got more comfortable with talking to strangers, I grew up in that era where my parents beat it into me, don't talk to strangers, you'll get kidnapped or something. And I think that had a lot to do with my shyness, this subconscious feeling that somebody was going to kidnap me. But the farther you go on the trail, you long for that interaction, the conversation, and the camaraderie, and it just made the whole experience much more fun.
So given the importance, though, of Katahdin in your life, having said you were going to do it in the journal on day one, very rash thing to do, by the way, but well done you. Let's talk about Katahdin, because many people got there, and I didn't, but many people got there, and they found a bit of an emptiness once it was done. What was that day like for you, given this was your goal all the time? And it's everybody's goal when they start their hike, but yours was almost like you wanted to see this new life happening to you. What was it like for you?
Surreal. It was a beautiful day. About a dozen of us finished together. We all knew each other really, really well.
Sure.
And, we all did the classic, Katahdin sign pictures, and everybody kind of did their celebrations, and then we all kind of picked our own little rock up on the summit and sort of reflected. And I remember thinking to myself, I made it. I got here.
Yeah.
What's next? And other people were saying, now what? What do I do now? And I was like, I'm looking forward to it. What's next? And I kind of had my future revealed to me through my hike, and I knew where I was going to be moving to. I had found a new home, and I had found a new life. I didn't know what I was going to be doing there, but I had found a new place to live. I had found a place that I was calling my home, and I had spent 10 days there. And so I knew my next step was already planned. I just had to get there. And so I didn't have to worry about going back to my job. I didn't have to worry about going back to a relationship or anything else. It was a completely different life that was starting to unfold. So I was looking at Katahdin as, this isn't the end of the trail. This is just the end of the section. My next section is going to start tomorrow. And more.
It's a good way to look at it. I think that's a good way to look at it, because we're going to come to a couple of things that happened to you after that. But you talked to me about something, and I've got to tell you, I didn't understand it when you talked about it. So I want the idiot's guide here, by the way. This is for me. Something called the Victor Turner's ritual process, which you say mirrors the through hike. What is the idiot's guide to that, without getting overly technical?
So, Rich,
because you're a teacher, you can do that sort of thing.
I can do this. Victor Turner wrote a book basically called The Ritual Process, and he was an anthropologist, and this came out in the late 1960s, prior to through hiking really being in the mainstream. And he studied several African tribes, and he was looking at what their rites of passage were. What did they involve? How did they mark a person's transition from, let's say, an adolescent to a teenager to an adult? Sure. And the rituals that they used as well. We look at, maybe getting your driver's license, graduating from high school, graduating from college, getting married, having a kid, retiring. Those are, major life stage markers in the Western world. And he looked at it in the context of these tribes, some of them very primitive, some very sophisticated, and he came up with a 3-step process that he called the ritual process. And stage 1 is when you leave the greater society. So for a through hiker, it's us getting to the trailhead and beginning that journey. So we're physically removing ourselves from what most people would call the real world. Yeah, sure. And we're entering into this unknown because, well, prior to the internet, you really didn't know what was around the next bend. It's very different now. So you're walking.
And even when you get on the trail, I don't care how many internet things you've seen, how much YouTube videos, nothing prepares you for this, does it?
I would agree with that. Yeah, physically or mentally, I don't think you can actually adequately prepare to through hike the Appalachian Trail or any other long distance trail for that matter. Yeah. So stage 1, you leave the quote real world and you enter into the trail. The third stage, I'm going to skip to the end, is when you re-enter society. You re-enter or reintegrate yourself back into which you came from. So with a through hiker, it's usually going back home. Stage 2 is what he calls the liminal stage. Liminality, that's where transformation takes place. That's where change happens. And that's the bulk of the process. So for the through hiker, it's emotionally and intellectually, once you have acknowledged that you're no longer a carpenter or a construction worker, you're now a hiker, then your transformation is going to begin. And the journey, think of it as a pilgrimage to Mecca or some other holy site. The journey to get there, which sometimes would take months and possibly even years, that's the actual spiritual transformation that somebody takes. Getting to that holy site is just a trail marker, basically. Being there doesn't necessarily transform you. It's the journey that you took to get there.
Yeah, most certainly.
And then, the pilgrims of old had to walk back, which sometimes took months or years. So they have time to process. And through hikers, also with combat veterans, usually they're back in the quote real world within a matter of 48 to 72 hours. Sure. And a lot of people struggle with that re-entry into, society.
Yeah. And actually you did get post-trial depression, but you didn't get it for about 18 years, didn't you? Which is a little bit delayed. How did it manifest itself within you? And what, and the reason I think you probably didn't get it straight away is because you were going on to something else. And I think that's always important to have something to be going on to. But 17 years or 18 years, man, that is a long time for it to hit you.
It really is. I rarely do things the quote normal way. And I had the great fortune of not needing to get a job right away. I had money from savings. I lived very, very simply. I moved to Hanover, New Hampshire. I lived there for almost 2 years, so the trail goes right through the town. I lived in the
Sure.
middle of the woods, right outside of town. I could walk back and forth to town every day. I did basically a work for stay with the guy that on the property that I lived with, and
Right.
I had a it was a dream-like existence post trail, and I think that really helped me process the experience and re-enter slowly on my own terms without the
Right.
pressures of paying bills, going to work every day. And most people don't have that. And I really took advantage of it. My post hike depression hit me after a back injury. And I was a snowboard instructor in a local mountain, and I don't even have a good story to tell about my injury. It's kind of embarrassing. I was just standing on the slope teaching a little kid. I didn't even have my snowboard on, and I slipped on a patch of ice and fell straight down. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I compressed my vertebrae in my lower back
Ooh, nasty.
and blew out 2 discs. And it took the doctors almost a year to figure out what was wrong with me. They thought it was sciatica, and they finally did MRIs on my spine. The third set of MRIs, they said, "Hey, you've got 2 blown out discs." And I was like, "That's fantastic.
Just
What
what
can
I
we do
need.
to fix this?" So I hadn't hiked for over a year, and it really affected me on a level that I didn't know was possible. I got clinically depressed. My doctor diagnosed me with severe clinical depression, and it was mainly because I couldn't get out into the woods, because that was my release from everything. My daughter and I would go hiking in the Whites, and she's my great hiking partner. I don't hike solo any longer. I
Right.
don't enjoy it, and not being able to get out into the
That's
woods for that
No,
long.
that's interesting, isn't it?
Mhm.
That in itself is a transformation for you,
It really
isn't
is.
it?
Yeah.
I mean, did your friends, or did you ditch all your friends totally, or did you get a whole new set of friends?
I got a little of both. I got a whole new set of friends, and I've been acquiring friends ever since.
Right,
The
but
friends,
my question was really what I wanted to ask was about once you got back and you were making this transformation within your life. Did your friends notice a difference in you, and was that a positive or a negative difference as far as they were concerned?
they noticed it. My close family members noticed a remarkable change in me, and it was all positive. And
Good.
except for my parents. My parents weren't convinced that I wasn't a lunatic because I had defied their conventions and norms. But my old friends pre-hike, I still communicate with a couple of them, but most of them, they're part of a different life. Wonderful, fantastic people, but they don't really get it. And I kind of replaced everything from back then.
Wow, how interesting! How interesting! And I was going to talk about trail magic, but if I will, I know you've got an opinion about trail magic and what's important. I presume because you mentioned it, it must be one of the things that something must have happened that really influenced you on the trail. So tell us about what that was.
A lot of things happened to me on the trail that have influenced me. It's the interesting thing about hiking. My through hike is the more I learn about things, the more I learn about what I did 22 years ago. I had a lot of feelings about the hike and the trail experience, but I didn't have the words to put to the feelings at the time.
Sure.
And the more I learn about other things, like Victor Turner's ritual process, I just discovered it by accident working on my doctorate. And I was like, wow, this dude really knows through hikers, and he's from the 60s, so he would have been a great through hiker. And the trail magic aspect is interesting because I think today most people just sort of assume that trail magic means free food. They're synonymous with one another. And for me, trail magic was different. I kind of saw it. The free food was great. Don't get me wrong. Everybody loves a free cheeseburger. But other things manifested themselves on the trail that, to my own understanding, is more magical. Things that I couldn't explain. Things that just happened without planning. The
It's those
spontaneity of
serendipitous,
things.
those serendipitous moments, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
but the trail magic keeps happening over and over and over. Even now, the things that never would have happened in my life had I not done A, B, and C first that had something to
Yeah.
do with the trail or people
Sure.
on the trail.
Sure.
And it can be something as simple as, getting to a shelter, 6 hours earlier than you expected because somehow you were hiking at 7 miles an hour. And you
Yeah, I
go
never
into
did that, but yeah.
I didn't do it very often, but sometimes you'd get into the zone and miles would just fly by, and you'd just show up somewhere, and it would be 11 o'clock in the morning instead of 4 in the afternoon. Getting to a road that never gets traffic on it, and somebody stops in front of you and says, "Hey, I'm headed to town. You want to ride?"
Yeah.
Sure. And the
Yeah.
people that you meet, I think people are the trail. The trail is just a path, but the people are the trail, and the people are the magic.
And I'm actually going to talk. We're going to talk now about somebody you met who is very well known in trail circles. Tell us about Adam, as he was called.
He was called Adam at one point for not quite half of his life. Adam was kind of parallel to my Mike. Everyone called me Mike in my pre-hike life.
Right.
And during my hike and after, everyone calls me Si. And Adam, it's a fairly generic name, but Adam, throughout his hiking, transformed and reinvented himself as somebody that people might be more familiar with, Baltimore Jack Tarlin.
That's right.
And I met him.
Actually, before you talk about him, one of my questions, and I hadn't actually worked out how to ask it as a question, was one of the sentences you wrote in your original email, which I thought was really interesting, was he was Adam and became Jack. I was Mike and became Si.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a fundamental transformation. Mm-hmm. So it was really, I was going to ask, I'm not even going to ask it now, but why did either of you feel the need to do that? But really, I think it's because you find yourself on the trail being something you prefer, perhaps, than the person you were before. Mm-hmm. So tell us how that transformation happened to Baltimore Jack, as far as you understood, because he became quite a good friend, didn't he?
He was more like a brother. He was a family member, and not like a tramley, but a real family. He was always Uncle Jack to my daughter Natalie. He met her when she was about 2 weeks old.
Right.
He was always at our house when he came up. I lived with him for 2 years in Hanover when he wasn't hiking. Jack was an interesting character, to put it lightly. I knew him until he passed away in 2016 and spent a lot of time having conversations with him. And he didn't often open up. And when he did, you had to question the accuracy of what he was telling you, because he was a clever guy, especially with his words. And Jack was, I think, even more fundamentally unhappy as Adam as I was as Mike. And these are my own opinions based on my relationship with him. But
Sure.
I believe, and so does my wife, Amber, that he was not capable of being Adam. Adam had so many expectations put on him from other people, his parents, his college professors, his college friends. Adam was going to be some, great corporate executive. He was going to go out there and conquer the world and make tons of money. And he was going to be a famous writer. He was going to be all of these things that Adam really didn't want to be. And he was living in a world that didn't fit him. It didn't suit him.
Right.
And he also had the Appalachian Trail planted into his psyche early on. His father and he were going to hike it, and that didn't happen. He lost both of his parents when he was quite young. And, he hiked the trail his first time, kind of as in honor of his dad and his hike that they had planned. And Adam went onto the trail, and kind of like the song, the Bruce Springsteen song, I got a wife and kids in Baltimore, and
Yes.
I can't quote the line right now. It kind of chokes me up a little bit, but he lived that song. He did have a wife and a daughter, and they got divorced. Like I got divorced, I didn't have a kid, and Adam was looking for a new life, something that suited him. in a way that was self-satisfying. And the trail helped him find that self-satisfaction. And
was he happy? Was he a happy man?
On the trail? Absolutely. Very happy. The trail was his life. People on the trail became his family. He left pretty much everyone that he knew pre-hike behind. Limited contact with his family. I met someone who thought that he had died many, many years before he actually did, because Adam had disappeared. And apparently out of his high school and college classes, many of his fellow students thought that he had died years and years before, because he had so thoroughly reinvented himself as Jack that Adam ceased to exist. And Jack he was Jack. He never spoke about Adam. Outside of private conversation.
I'd heard that he was Adam, but I didn't know anything about his background. But the fact that you actually lived with him as well, and I love the fact you couldn't rely upon his stories. That's hilarious. That is. So let's talk about the book now, and it's called "In the Real World I Hike: Transformation of Purpose and Self in 5 Million Easy Steps," which of course they're not. First question, of course, is what on earth took you so long to write it? And actually, I was only joking about the time it took you to write it. I'd imagine that going through that delayed depression must have in some way influenced when you could write it, didn't it?
It did, the when I could write it, but also the why I wanted to write it. And putting this out there is something else that is not natural to me. I genuinely don't like drawing a lot of attention to myself.
Sure.
And I genuinely don't often share intimate details of myself with strangers like this, because there's some fairly heavy stuff that I wrote about.
Your school kids are going to love this if they read it, aren't they?
Yeah, it's... don't even want to think about that right now. I didn't even let my wife read it until a couple of weeks ago. And it's a complicated evolution in my thinking process, because when Jack passed away, it was both a shock, but also kind of expected. He was in declining health for many years because of his alcohol abuse.
Yeah.
He never left the trail. And the trail, like I said before, was his life, and he was, my brother. And I had tried to get Jack to write down his story for years. I even went so far as to buy him journals and said, Jack, just start writing your life down.
Sure.
It needs to be remembered. And when he passed away, the likelihood of that happening dissolved. It disintegrated. It was never going to happen again. And I wanted at least some part of him to remain, that people could read, look at, maybe get some understanding of who Jack was and how he became Jack. And my daughter actually was quite a catalyst for me writing this. And it goes back to, trail magic. At Jack's Memorial and Trail Days, some things happened that kind of motivated me or inspired me, or actually almost mandated me to do this, but I didn't know how. And I gained some of the skills through my doctorate program, and I was working on that. And things became more clear, but I really wanted to not allow his memory and he as a person, as we knew him, to disappear. I wanted to make sure that at least somebody wrote something down about Jack that was positive, that was kind of speaking to who he was as a human being, not as simply as, an alcoholic or somebody that was a vagabond, as he may have been described by some people.
But this is not just about Baltimore Jack. This is about your transformation and other people's transformation on the trail. What do you want people, apart from a positive image of Jack, what do you want people to take away from the book?
The real world is not always what we're told it is. And sometimes there's
Oh my God, you sound like QAnon conspiracy theorists.
Red pill or blue pill? No, I think it's much simpler than that.
All right, yeah.
I've met so many people from my prior life and now that are just not happy with who they are, and they don't do anything to change it. Now, everyone's life experiences and life situations are different, and not everybody can just walk away for 6 months and go hiking. But change can happen, and the hikers that shared their stories with me, it really isn't so much about the hiking part. It's about what they learned about themselves by taking a chance, taking a risk, leaving the real world behind, and challenging themselves and gaining this confidence and strength and self-awareness in themselves, and that their perspective on the world is very different when they finish than it was when they started. And their awareness of who they are as a person is very different at the end than it was at the beginning. And the idea that you can reinvent yourself, you're not stuck with who you are or who you've been labeled as. You know, our society is so fond of labels.
I agree with that. I agree with that. And in fact, for me, it's a very significant thing for me is an actual trail name. And this is why I was drawn to your Adam became Jack and you became Si. Well, I became Mighty Blue. You know, I was known on the trail in 2019. People knew me already because of the podcast. I was Mighty Blue. I wasn't Steve. I wasn't Steve Adams. I was Mighty Blue. It's a very funny thing. It's a surprising thing when it happens to you as well, isn't it?
Absolutely. And going back to that side, no one here calls me Mike on a regular basis. Somebody that doesn't know me, they see my name somewhere. Oh, you're Michael. True, but I prefer to go by Si if you don't mind. And it's
where does Si come from? Is it just short for Sisemore?
It is, except I spell it differently. I spell it S-Y, and that I did kind of as an honor to my father because he obviously has the same last name, but he was always called Si, S-I, and he got it in the Navy. He was in World War II. He was stationed at Pearl Harbor for most of the war. And I wanted to kind of carry his nickname on the trail as my nickname, but being contradictory to the world, I changed the spelling a little bit. And, it stuck with me. And I didn't intend on staying Si, but everybody calls me Si, and it just happened.
Well, look, I'm so glad you wrote to me. I thoroughly enjoyed talking with you. And in fact, I just want to ask you, is the book actually out yet or not?
It is. It is out.
Right. Okay, because I wasn't sure because it has been out for 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, fine. Well, I'm going to put a link in the show notes so if people are interested, they want to get the book. But I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your story with me. I can see you, the audience can't see you, but I can see you were quite emotional talking about Baltimore Jack. So I appreciate you doing that. And just thanks for coming on the show.
It's been a pleasure. It's been a blast. I've had a lot of fun. And could I finish up with just one thought?
Absolutely.
I was listening to Ryan's interview with Nimblewill Nomad.
All right.
And I met him in '99 very briefly. He would never remember me, but I always remember that he was
probably a young man of 70, wasn't he then?
Absolutely. And he was mentioning something that I would call trail magic, but he referenced it as sort of like divine intervention almost when he became the first hiker to go across Max Patch.
Great story.
And if you think back, if he hadn't had been in a mental place that wasn't necessarily the best and approached those guys that were building the style and had a conversation with them, that never would have transpired in him hiking alone across Max Patch, which is one of the most beautiful vistas and spots on the AT, totally. And had that moment. Can you imagine that? You're the first person and you're the only person standing on top of Max Patch with the entire world exposed to you. And then he's able to go back several times, obviously, but that moment, you can't even put a price tag on that.
You can't buy that. You absolutely can't buy that.
That's trail magic to me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Okay, man. Well, look, great to talk to you. I thoroughly enjoyed chatting with you and reading up on you as well, effectively, and working out how to frame these questions. So I appreciate you coming on. All the best.
Thank you very much for the opportunity, Steve. Have a great afternoon.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Now, I could have, in fact, I normally would have edited that conversation quite a bit tighter, but I really wanted you all to hear Si's emotions as he talked about those profound changes, and particularly when he was talking about Baltimore Jack. He had some genuine insights into a man who I guess many of us don't know much about. We've heard the legends, I guess. Sharing those insights choked him up a lot. And what about his comments on the transformation that one goes through on a through hike? As I mentioned earlier, Si was able to articulate those changes better than most people I've spoken with. Quite how his kids at school are going to look at him now, I don't know. But I hope it is with a deeper sense of respect now that he's bared his soul. I put a link to his book in the show notes in case you'd like to read more about Si, Baltimore Jack, and others. Now, let's hear what Katie's been up to. And before we get to her, I wanted to thank those of you who have reached out to me to see if you could help Katie as she heads north. It doesn't surprise me at all because I know how caring the hiking community can be, and especially my listeners. But it is always wonderful to hear how people want to help other people on these hikes. Here's Katie. And we're back on with Katie. How are you, Katie? And I know it's very warm up there, so is sweaty the term?
Definitely sweaty. So the heat index for the last few days was around 103. So
oh my gosh!
Yeah.
What was it like up the mountains?
Yeah.
What was it like up the mountains?
When you would get in the shade, you could get a breeze now and then, and that helped. But just taking breaks, making sure, drinking plenty of water with electrolytes.
Yes.
So that made the difference.
So how's the water been? I know you're in, where are you Pennsylvania now? Maryland, Pennsylvania. Yeah. So how are you finding the water situation? Because I know from Duncannon onwards, I seem to remember straight out of Duncannon, it is really quite dry for a little while.
Well, I'm in Duncannon right now.
Oh, right.
And so what I've been doing is I'm just carrying water where typically before I would, just filter when I would get to a stream. So I find myself carrying more water just to be sure.
Yes. Pack your fears, as they say, and it is a real, but it is a real fear. Running out of water and that desperation,
right,
the desperation you feel is awful, isn't it? It's absolutely dreadful.
Yeah, there have been a few dry places, but I knew there was going to be, so I just made sure I was ready for it.
And you've had a couple of friends this week helping you along the way again.
Yeah. Oh, had a great time with Lisa and Audrey. I was able to select pack a few days and get in some bigger miles. So, yeah, I'm feeling pretty good.
So what sort of mileage have you been doing then? What sort of mileage have you been able to do?
Well, yesterday I did 18, and part of the day was with, I guess 10 of those miles was with a full pack.
Right.
And then, 15-mile day, 17-mile day.
Wow. Wow, you're getting up there again.
Was able to get some big miles in and still feel good at the end of it. So
it's a lovely spot though, isn't it? Boiling Springs to Duncannon's a great walk, but apart from that last little bit down out of the rocks at Duncannon, that's quite tasty, isn't it?
Yeah. Just the fun part is when you plant your foot and the rock shifts. But it's been manageable, and there's the Cumberland Valley, which is all farmland. So walked across that over a couple of day period. Boiling Springs is a lovely little town.
It is.
Just ran into right out of Penmar when I started at the Mason-Dixon line. That very first day out, there had been tornadoes the night before.
Wow.
And I ended up bushwhacking for several miles, and I was like, wow, how are people doing this? I mean, I'm talking at least 100 trees down across the trail.
Wow.
And that is, the whole place was hit, and big mature trees down. So
have you been struck though, as I was, have you been struck how well maintained, because of the work of all the volunteers, the trail generally is, isn't it?
Oh yeah, it's pretty well maintained. Especially, stayed at this one beautiful shelter. I think it's Quarry Gap Shelter.
All right.
It was so lovely. very cute with the.
Is that the one up the hill? Is that the one up the hill from?
Potted,
let me see. They've got potted plants. They've got a little stream in front. Oh my gosh, it's beautiful, isn't it?
It was so adorable. It was so cute and just.
And there she was, gone. I was going, Katie, but nothing. And then I realised what must have happened. My Skype calling subscription had tried to renew and found that my card on file had expired. So they cut me off mid-bloody sentence. I've never had that happen before. So the recording kept going while I got online, updated my card and paid to get my account back. I bet this never happens with NPR. So now, back to Katie. And I'm not really sure, well, I wasn't sure what happened because we suddenly lost Katie. It looks like Skype decided to cut me off because my my subscription was out. But we're back on now. So hello again, Katie.
Hi, Steve.
And we were talking about that lovely shelter. The shelters, some of these shelters are so varied in quality, aren't they? Some are so well looked after, and some obviously less so. But they definitely take a bit of pride in that one that you were talking about just now. Yeah, quite something.
Yes, there's several beautiful ones, especially like coming up to Quarry Gap Shelter. You're walking through just a canopy of rhododendron.
Yes.
So really beautiful. Really
yes,
beautiful.
It's almost like they landscaped the entire thing, didn't they? Not only the shelter, but everywhere around it as well. Yeah.
Right.
So
it's coming right out of Caledonia State Park.
That's right.
So
that's right.
That's what it was. Last night I was at one that they had to remove the steps because the porcupines would get into it.
Oh my gosh.
They had like sheet metal around the edge so the porcupines wouldn't chew them up.
So have you seen any wild animals yet? Still nothing wild?
Not porcupines. Haven't seen any porcupines.
Oh,
seen plenty of, I saw snakes, no rattlesnakes, but lots of black rat snakes.
I was told it was almost impossible to go through Pennsylvania without seeing snakes. And I saw some in 2019, but I didn't see a single snake in Pennsylvania in 2014. And I didn't mention it until I actually got out of the state because it seemed so unlikely. So what's the plan now? I mean, where are you now? You're as you say, you're in Duncannon. What are your plans for the next few days now?
Well, it's to head out. I'm just taking a Nero today, and then I head out tomorrow. And I think I have maybe 2 weeks left, about 2 weeks left in Pennsylvania. I am about a third of the way through Pennsylvania. So.
And you're thinking to yourself, why do people make such a fuss out of Pennsylvania, weren't you?
Well, I feel like you do have to pay attention on the rocks, and I just make sure that I'm taking the breaks. I know the rocks further north are supposed to be more rocks and but I've seen rocks too in Maryland where you're just walking across a boulder field.
Yes, yeah.
I just feel like you take it as it comes, and I don't plan to heap stress on myself by building anxiety about what's coming with the rocks. I just, every day there's something interesting about being on the trail, and I love that aspect. So I think, just taking the rocks, and I've seen on social media, people now are they're really struggling with the rocks, and I need to stay off that. and not let that play with my head.
I think foot placement is very important on the rocks. Mm-hmm. And finding a place to put your feet is, not joking aside, it's quite difficult. However, you can do it. It's just a case of taking your time and working your way through it. So what is your plan now, though? So you obviously know where you are on the trail. You know where you're going to be next. The speed at which you're going now, you're making quite substantial mileage now, which is great. And your knee, I presume, is still fine.
Right. It's doing great.
Right.
I'm just going to keep pushing forward. I have, like I said, a couple of weeks, I think, left in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
I hit my 550 mark, so I'm a quarter of the way through this journey.
I saw that. That's quite an achievement.
Really happy about that. Really glad about that. That was a boost for
Yeah.
me. And I feel good that I'm able to make some bigger miles now with, and then I'll take a low day just to make sure my body's recovering.
Yes.
But I'm feeling pretty good, and I want to try to keep it that way.
So you're pushing forward, obviously, and you've still got time now to make it to Katahdin by October. Is that still on the cards for you, as far as you're concerned?
Oh yes,
good,
absolutely. Barring any serious injury.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
And how is your food going? What are you doing with food right now? Have you got the hiker hunger yet, or are you still not pushing it?
I do feel like I have it. In fact, I'm going to eat after this.
Of course you are. Yeah. Time in town is spent eating and drinking copious amounts of everything, isn't it, really?
Right. So, yeah. And Lisa and Audrey fed me well, so they took good care of me in that.
Oh, did you stay with them?
Definitely.
Did you actually stay with them? I didn't realize that.
I did, yes.
Oh, tell us about that. Tell us about that that couple of days.
Well, we had the chance to do a day hike together.
Nice.
They slack packed me and then walked with me one day for 8 miles, and then I went on another, I guess 7 miles. It ended up being like 17 miles at the end of the day, and then they got off in at what is it? The general store there,
not Boiling Springs.
Pine Grove Furnace.
Oh,
Pine Grove Furnace.
Oh, do you do the half? Did you do the half-gallon challenge?
No, but I ate a big hamburger.
Yeah, hamburgers are always welcome.
Right. So, and we met up with another section hiker named Wheezy P, who's I think.
Oh, I know Wheezy P very well. Yes.
Yes. So
yeah, she's great, isn't she?
That was fun. She and her dog Boots were out hiking. So got to spend some time with them.
Don't you think it's funny not funny, but it's a wonderful thing of the trail, how people gather around you to help you and want to share your hike with you and spend some time with you on the trail and help you out if they can. It's I know we say it a lot on this show, and everyone says it's the people when they finish this hike, but really people coming together and helping you because they know what it means to be out there. And in so-called real life, you're going to find people who have no idea what you've done. They know you've walked 2,000 miles, but have no idea what you've done. So that thing that those people who do hike and hike quite a bit, they understand where you're coming from, don't they?
Yes. And boy, they just have wrapped me up in love. So that makes me just good people. Just good people, and I've loved every moment spent with them.
And what about other people? Are you starting to hike around other people quite regularly now?
The truth is, I was in a shelter by myself last night.
Good Lord.
I'm kind of thinking the heat drove a lot of the people off the trail.
Wow.
So I'll be curious to see. It's supposed to get cool again in a few days, so I'm going back out tomorrow, and I'll be interested to see if people get back on. And
where are you staying? Where are you staying in Duncannon? You're not. Are you at the Doyle?
No, I'm staying at the Doyle. I went to the Doyle to try to get some lunch, and the door was closed.
Oh,
but
really?
They said they open on Wednesday. Today's Tuesday, and I think a lot of these hotels and restaurants have been impacted and schedules changed and reduced. And I think it has to do with with COVID closures.
Sure.
Still trying to rebound from that.
So where are you staying then? Where are you staying
I'm staying at a hotel. Just have a room nearby. So.
I must admit, I did that a lot. When there's a chance of a hotel, let's get in there. Getting a private room is more special when you've been spending 2 or 3 nights in a shelter, isn't it?
Right. And I I have to be honest, I'm dealing with some heat rash under my arms, my upper arms.
Yeah, I know.
It's just, looks pretty bad. So just trying to take care of that before going back out. So
well, I saw the recommendations online.
Oh my gosh.
Oh dear. What?
Oh yes.
Well, body glide notwithstanding. I hope you hope the heat. I mean, joking apart, the heat can be pretty serious, can't it? So hope that settles down a little bit for you, and you enjoy the next week as well. And we'll catch up then. Okay.
Yeah. All right, Steve. All right, thanks a bunch.
Take it easy.
All right.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
18 miles. How about that? She's pushing on and now a quarter of a way through the miles. From where she is now, she should be able to make it to Katahdin. Of course, she is realistic enough to know that things can change. In fact, they can change in an instant. But she's now getting those miles under her belt, and they'll serve her well in the inevitable slowdown in the Whites and Main. I'm excited for her. Just before we go, I wanted to remind you that I'm going back for the third time to the John Muir Trail in late July. My intent is that the shows while I'm away will all be preloaded, though I probably won't be able to share them on Facebook because I'm going to be in the wilderness somewhere. So, more than ever, it's important for you to follow or subscribe to the show in whichever platform you prefer. That way, you won't miss an episode and it will be available on your preferred platform at just after 3 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Apple changed the status from subscribe to follower recently to avoid confusion with listeners. Of course, you can find all our shows on hikingradionetwork.com, but also with those shows are links to your preferred platform on every episode. I'll see you next week.